Us. This is the SPUR Application Workshop webinar. My name is Sarah. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm an academic advisor with the Rouser College of Natural Resources, as well as your SPUR coordinator. I will be serving as the moderator for this session. Also assisting me with the moderation of this information session is our Rouser College curriculum planner and undeclared advisor, Temple Byers. Temple, go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Hello, everyone. It's so nice to see you. And yes, Temple Byers, pronouns she, they, and I will be helping kind of organize your questions today.
Amazing. Thank you, Temple. So to start us off, I would like to discuss with you the outline for today's workshop before introducing our presenters. As you can see, you have all been muted, and this has been done to prevent background noise from entering the session, as well as prevent too many people from talking at once. After we introduce our presenters and go through some basic information about the SPUR program, the panelists will be presenting on their portion of the SPUR application process, resume, personal statement, and the interview. The panelists will present, then we will open it up for Q&A. Students will have time to ask questions by using the Q&A function. Temple and I will be monitoring the Q&A and will direct the questions to the panelists in an orderly fashion. We expect all participants to abide by the UC Berkeley principles of community so that we can maintain a safe, caring, and humane environment, and we'll be removing individuals who violate these principles. Now that we've gotten all those logistics out of the way, I would like to introduce our three wonderful presenters. We have Professor Alejandra Echeverry, Nita and Jen Racklin. Presenters, please introduce yourselves and share a little bit about yourself and your interaction with the SPUR program. We'll go ahead and start with Professor Echeverry.
All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Alejandra Echeverry. I use she, her, ella pronouns. I'm an assistant professor of conservation science at the Department of Environmental Science, Policy and Management. I teach an undergraduate class called Principles of Conservation Biology, and I'm very excited to be part of SPUR program this year because I have a project on conservation and conservation psychology. So I'm going to be recruiting a student to work with me on experiments that hopefully we'll do in the zoo, wondering if awareness of animal intelligence and animal cognition lead to more willingness for people to donate to conserve animals that we think are smart. So yeah, I'm excited to be talking about what is a good interview, how all of you can prepare for interviews. And I guess I'll pass it over to Nita.
Thanks, Alejandra. My name is Nita Iyer. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a staff member with the UC Berkeley Natural Reserves and Field Stations. I've served as a mentor for SPUR projects for the past 2 semesters now, and I also have a SPUR project this semester on science communication at the Natural Reserve. So I'm excited to offer that opportunity again. And I'll be talking about the personal statement and what you can use to kind of stand out in your personal statement and some of the common pitfalls to avoid. And I'll pass it over to Jen.
Hi, I'm Jen Racklin. I'm a counselor here at Berkeley Career Engagement. I work with students in the College of Natural Resources and have many appointments and many drop-ins with people working on a SPUR application. So I'm happy to be here to talk about resumes.
Amazing. Thank you all so much. Big thanks to my presenters for joining us today. I want to start by giving us a quick interview of the SPUR program. SPUR, or Sponsored Projects for Undergraduate Research, encourages faculty and undergraduate students within the Rouser College of Natural Resources to collaborate on research projects by providing grant funding to support their joint project. The funding for this program is generously donated by Rouser College alumni. Students may present in the SPUR program by applying to the faculty-initiated projects or in their junior or senior year by creating a student-initiated project. This workshop will be highlighting how to navigate applying to the faculty-initiated projects. Currently, students can submit their applications for up to 3 faculty-initiated projects between now and January 28th at 5 p.m. To apply, you will need a resume, personal statement, and unofficial transcripts. Some, but not all, SPUR projects also require an interview before selection. Our panelists will be going over each of these to help you better prepare for the SPUR application process. Jen will be starting us off by sharing how to create an effective resume. Then Neetha will go over writing a personal statement. And finally, Professor Echeverry will discuss how to prepare and execute an interview. Thanks for starting us off, Jen. Please proceed.
Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, so it's always a little bit tricky to decide how to talk about resumes because people can be anywhere in the process. If you're here and you don't have anything, or if you're here and you have something, but you're looking at tailoring, and trying to kind of go down the middle of the road. So if I'm not exactly hitting on your need, then please just know that you can make an appointment and come in and meet with me, or on Tuesday morning from 10 to 11, I have a little drop-in resume lab in the computer room off of Mulford 260. So I am going to do my best here and happy to answer questions at the end too. So I'm going to get started by talking about the resume format. And it's pretty simple. Ideally, you want to stick to one page. I know sometimes in academia, it's a little bit more flexible. They may use the term CV. For an undergrad, a resume and a CV are essentially the same thing because CVs often contain publications, conferences attended. Since undergraduates don't have those typically, they are more likely to have the content of a resume, with the exception that it could just be a little bit longer. So I try to have everyone stick to a page. There can be exceptions, but typically we can make that work, kind of optimizing the real estate. So you'll see out there in the world, there are these templates that exist with kind of this block formatting. And those aren't ideal because they are difficult to read and scan, but also they just don't use space well. So I'll show you some examples, but it's really optimizing the space on that piece of paper. You want to list, you will have different sections, but within each section, make sure that everything is going in reverse chronology. So you go from present to past. I already mentioned it needs to be easy to read and scan. So typically, if you look at like Calibri or Times New Roman, check out what a 10-point font looks like in those fonts, ideally no smaller than that. And then margins can be really small. So it's not the rules of an essay. You could have a 0.5 margin all the way around, and that gets you a pretty good amount of space. You should be able to get everything on that document. I actually am going to drop in the chat before I forget a link to this slideshow, because at the end I do give you some links for example resumes. So I'm going to do that now before I forget. Okay, so really simple. That's typically the format of a resume. For the sections, sections may vary. Everyone is going to have a name and a contact information section up top. You'll have education. I recommend a skills section. And then everything else after that can be grouped into some kind of experience. So some people just have one section called experience. Sometimes if it makes sense, you may break it down into projects or volunteer or leadership. So that's part of what we're strategizing. Ideally, with a resume, to make yourself stand out, you want the reader to see the most relevant and important information first. And that's why we're going to have education. And that's why we're going to have a skills section. And then with all of the experiences you have left over, we're going to see what makes sense for you to highlight next. So you don't have to have all of these sections. It just kind of depends on what will work best for you. And what I'm really going to focus on as we're talking about sections, are the ones that I think make the most sense for SPUR. As I've been helping people with their resume the past few weeks, often they're missing these sections, which can be really helpful. So I'm going to spend extra time kind of focus on coursework, skills, maybe a projects or a lab experience section, and then maybe also research if you have that. Okay, so at the top of your resume, you want to have your contact information. You can see an example of what that looks like. Just very simple. We don't need it to take up a lot of space. Phone number, email, LinkedIn is up to you. I mean, I think people are just gonna these days go and look it up, whether it's there or not. So that's up to you, but definitely your phone number and your email. So pretty simple, straightforward. Next, you should follow with your education section. And in that section, you're going to have your university. A lot of times we'll put city and state because Berkeley's in the title. I don't think you need to state that again. So you could say University of California, Berkeley, and that can just suffice. I don't need to know all the time you've been here, like when you started, like your dates of attendance. You can just note your expected graduation date. Typically, you share your degree. If you aren't declared yet, you can say intended. That's fine. GPA is up to you. If you have a great GPA, anything 3.0 or above, you can include it. I don't know how much for SPUR. Maybe someone else can answer this. They are screening by GPA, but if you have a great GPA, you might as well include it. And then you can also include your community college, because that is like your first 2 years here at Cal, and a lot of great experiences happen there. So okay to include community college. If you're a first-year student, it's okay to state your high school. And I think most importantly in this section, what is helpful is to highlight your relevant coursework. So here's an example of what that looks like. And this is how, if you have multiple institutions listed, be sure to list the relevant coursework under each institution so it's clear what you did where. But this will help show the reader that you have a foundation of knowledge in what you're applying to. So that is education. After education, I think when you're making a research resume, it's really helpful to have a skills section up top. A lot of times you see skills sections on resumes, but they'll come at the bottom. And having this right after education is also really helpful, because if you are applying for a role where they're asking for specific skills, then having this right up top is a way, it's that relevant and important rule. They can quickly, easily see at a glance, do you have these key things I'm looking for? And it doesn't mean that if you don't have everything that you shouldn't apply. Also, sometimes people worry, gosh, if I list Python, they're going to expect that I can, do all these amazing in-depth things. And so then people don't want to list it. But that's a missed opportunity, because especially if you are familiar with it. And that's where you might consider doing things like adding some qualifiers. So it's okay to say familiar with Python and Java, proficient in our Tableau. So you can use qualifiers. Also, breaking them down in sections is going to make it just easier and more helpful to read. So having that skills section, I think, is a good strategy when you're applying for anything that is technical. Okay, then the other thing I see a lot of people missing when they are preparing their resumes for this, they will say, I don't have any experience. I'm applying for this. I want the experience, but I don't have anything. And then as we're talking, I realize, like, yeah, you do. Like, if you've maybe never had a research experience in a lab, but you've had lab classes. And so you, depending on what you're applying for, think through the things you've done in your classes. And you can include a project section, or you can pull from a class. And it's a way to show, up above, you've mentioned, hey, I have the skill. And now there's an opportunity to see where you applied it. So feel free to think through your projects and the things you've done in your courses and highlight those. For a lot of people, it's that foundational coursework and it's things they've done in their classes that have given them that foundation. And so when you write this section, you can title it projects. Typically, you put the name of the course, the semester you took it, you can give the project a name, and then you bullet out what you did. And I'll talk about bullets in a minute, but that's typically the layout for a project section. Okay, then everything else can fall into experience. And you can look at what you have left over. If it's just one or two things, maybe you make one section called experience. If it's a number of things, then that's where you might decide to divide up and say, okay, I'm going to call this, of all the things I have left over, they're really leadership. So I'm going to make a leadership section. I don't care what role, what industry, I don't care what you're doing. I haven't found an employer, an instructor yet that doesn't value leadership. So you can decide what makes sense for your experience sections, but they typically all have this information. The name of the employer or the organization, the location, UC Berkeley can work as a location, your title, the dates in which you did it, and then of course your bullet points. And we'll talk about these again in a minute. So an experience section might look something like this, and I decided to do research. If you have prior research, then because you're applying for another research experience, why not make that a category and have that really stand out, jump off the page? So you can see here, title, name of the organization, location, dates, and the bullets of what the person did. Okay, bullet points. This is where I think it can just feel so frustrating. Like, how do I talk about the things I've done? And I hope that maybe visually this helps it to make more sense. So ideally, you start each bullet with that action-oriented verb or skill. And we do that because if someone's scanning, they don't have to read the whole thing to really get a sense of like what you can do. So ideally, created a program, utilized Excel to do X, Y, Z. And then the other components of that bullet is going to be the how or the why. And if there's an impact or a result, you can also share that. I say if because some things, you're just not there long enough to really know an impact. Some things can't be quantified. I've seen students really worry when they can't do this. So I just want to highlight, it's great when you can, but it doesn't mean there's something wrong or you're missing something. Sometimes you just can't. So if we look at this bullet, often people come in and they're pretty simple. They might say, hey, I created a program. But there's so much more that went into doing that. And so that's where, if it's really relevant to what you're applying to, you could tell me that you utilized Excel, but maybe you want to dig into that more to give me a better understanding or to highlight things that might really be transferable to what you're applying to. So here you can see in the revised bullet, the action word, the what did you do is I created this. The how and the why to educate 500 community members, how using video and in-person workshops. And here, maybe there wasn't an impact, maybe a result didn't come from this, but we can quantify. Creating a program for 20 is really different than creating a program for 500. So hopefully this little formula can help you as you think through how you're writing these bullets. One thing to always keep in mind, you're applying for research, and of course there's a technical aspect, but in a lot of the things you've done, there's also these really great soft skills. And again, I don't know in any circumstance where they wouldn't be valued. Like if you're in a lab, you might be doing technical things, but you still need to work as a part of a team and communicate, show up, be flexible, all of those things. So as you think through experiences, don't forget to also highlight these soft skills. Soft skills are the things that in order to have an impact, you have to show. So there is a note here. I wouldn't include soft skills in that skills section up top because they just really don't have an impact. So save the space, but be sure to work them into your bullets where you can. And then to help you, I have a link here. Sometimes it's just hard to think of, like, what are different action-oriented words or skills? So this link will take you to a list. I know that this is really hard to see, but this link will take you to a list of like, you know, just to help you kind of think through or you know, jog your memory, words that you can use. And then finally, at the very end, I've been kind of talking about this, but I just want to show you really quickly what these actually look like. So I've given you 2 links. This is a resume. Actually, I helped this person. They were an 8th major. And you can see the education section, Berkeley, the degree, the coursework, the skills. For them, they stuck with one experience. It all kind of was very similar. So they just did this professional experience, but the name of the organization is here, the location, their title, the bullets, and then they had an actual research experience section. I also want to show you this because if you're fighting for space, what I find happens is a lot of people will leave out like these service positions, but they're actually really important. I mean, they show things like work ethic. You know, these are not easy roles. You don't have to take up precious space bulleting out what you did if you don't have the room. And so if you don't have the room, rather than leaving it off, this is something I'll often do, is if you can just list it. And that way they know it's there. If we guess wrong and they really are curious and want to know more about it, they can ask you in your interview. But I purposely included this resume so you could see the strategy, because I know sometimes that happens. And then really quickly, the other resume example, I wanted to show you how you would include projects. So again, education section with relevant coursework, skills section broken up, if that makes sense. And then this person kind of combined things. So if you maybe have one experience and you have one project, it's okay to put them together. So you'll see the title, the company for this role, but next you see a project title. And this was actually for a company. If it was for a class, you might, you know, list the class and then the title. So you can have a mix. This person did a leadership section because with everything left over, this is the title that made sense. So this is a layout, 2 different layouts that you might consider that I think work well when you're applying to SPUR. And you can also see some great examples of these resume bullets. So that's kind of an overview. And if I'm happy to answer specific questions, I kind of, like I said, took the middle of the road here, what might apply most to everyone. But if you have questions, please ask. It can be your public service for the day. I guarantee you other people have the same question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jen, for creating that presentation and providing all those examples. We are going to open it up for some Q&A, so feel free to add your questions to the Q&A feature, and I will be facilitating your questions to Jen. To start us off, I have a question from the audience. Since this is a resume for a Berkeley research project, could I put course codes, for example, Biology 1A in the relevant coursework, or should I specifically write out the course title?
Yeah, I in general tell people to not use the department and the number because it doesn't mean anything to anyone. Of course, considering your audience, it might, so you probably could get away with that. But I think it's nice to just like not get in the habit of that. So I'd probably take the title. If it's a really long title, you can shorten it. You just want to be sure that if they're reading it on your resume and they looked at a transcript, they would look the same. So general advice, I would say, do the title, not the department and the course number. Just as a general rule. Again, you probably could get away with that, but also you don't want to assume that everybody knows every course and number either.
Awesome. Thank you, Jen. Another question is, how do you speak to a lack of experience in a subject on your resume, particularly if it's a skill set you want to learn in this role?
So, I love that question. I'm so glad that you asked that because a lot of times I'll read statements and they'll be talking a lot about what they don't have. Although I don't have this, like I've never been able to do XYZ. And what's really important in both the resume and in your statement is you talk about what you do have, or even just the tone. So I helped somebody the other day who was saying, I don't have this. And just even a slight shift to, I am really looking forward to gaining this is a much better way to talk about that. So I don't think you should be drawing attention to what you don't have. I know we'll talk about statement in a little bit. You might address there what you're hoping to achieve. I think that's a better shift in tone. So talk up all the good things that you do have to offer, the things that may be transferable. Sometimes that's where like maybe you had a food industry role and you think, I'm going to leave this off. It's not relevant. But in the food industry, you're following procedures and health protocols. In a lab, you're following procedures and health protocols. So not the same thing, but it is transferable and it's similar. So, happy to help you think through transferable skills. A lot of people overlook that.
Thank you, Jen. Since SPUR allows you to apply to a maximum of 3 projects, and a lot of the projects are in varying fields, how do we or should we be tailoring our resume for each project?
Yeah, ideally, ideally you would. There is reality. You have other competing priorities, I'm sure, but in an ideal world, if you really want to stand out, then I think it is best to tailor as much as you can. So some things on your resume may not change, like a leadership section that may not change. You're still going to highlight the leadership aspects of those roles, but maybe what projects you put on varies, or maybe the skills differ. So I think ideally, yes, you would tailor as much as you possibly can.
Great, thank you, Jen. I have a student asking, I'm in classes during your resume workshops, Jen. How can I get feedback and guidance on my resume?
Yeah, so you can make appointments through our handshake system. I'll drop a link to that in the chat. We offer 30-minute appointments, or these next few weeks, we also put out same day 15-minute appointments for resume and cover letter checks, just to make it easier to get in. So if you can't come to the lab, I would say make a 30-minute appointment or one of the same day 15-minute appointments. And then our peers are also doing drop-ins every afternoon. They go through a ton of training. Many of them have been involved in research. They can also give you feedback.
Thank you, Jen. We have another question from the audience. If I'm unsure whether an experience is relevant, is it better to include it or not include it?
Yeah, I'm just not a fan of leaving things off, because even if it's not the most relevant thing, if nothing else, it can show, hey, I did this relevant stuff while I was juggling these other things. So I like to keep things on. For a new student, you're going to go back into high school. As you're moving on at Cal, you start to leave high school off. So if you're fighting for space, or if it's something that you feel like isn't really relevant and it's from high school, then I may leave it off. I tend to look at more, what am I going to highlight in the bullets, or is it something I even bullet or just put down in an additional experience section? So I always try to keep things on, especially if it's something you've done at Cal.
Awesome. Thank you, Jen. I think you had some really great examples for our students, but I also want to acknowledge that SPUR is a research exposure opportunity. So for the students who are freshmen or haven't been able to engage in research projects or internships due to, for example, working while going to school, can you talk a little bit about how to highlight their experiences as well?
Yeah, so same thing. These are sections you'll often see, but you include what you have. I'll drop a link in the chat to a example of a first year resume. The only reason I didn't include it is because it has a skills section. It's just down at the bottom, and I wanted that to come up at the top. But I'll put a link there, and you'll see on that resume that person doesn't have all of these sections, and that's fine. This is a program where, depending on the project, they're going to be looking for different things. And so that's the tailoring piece. If you have something they're looking for, you want to be sure to include it. If you don't, then that's okay. You include what you have. And like I said, if there's anything transferable, like maybe you don't have research experience, but you worked in a role where you're following a protocol or procedures, let's talk about that. The statement of purpose also, I think, really helps with those kinds of things, because that's where you can get into what you are hoping to gain, and explain your interest. So I'll drop the link to make an appointment, and I'll drop that example first year student resume in the chat, and you'll be able to see that, that person doesn't have all these sections because they just shouldn't at that point. That's totally fine.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jen. Again, Jen Racklin, our RCNR Career Center counselor. Jen is available for appointments, and then she also hosts drop-in resume support on Tuesdays from 10 to 11 in the computer lab in 216 Mulford. Thank you, Jen. Next, we have Neeta Ayar sharing how to navigate the personal statement. Go ahead, Neeta.
Great. I'm just going to share my screen really quickly. Share. Okay, I'm going to try and just share a portion of my screen so I'm not all over the place. Okay, does everyone see the slides?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so the personal statement, and thank you again, Jen. I think a lot of the points that I'm going to hit here about the personal statement will reflect what you've said about the CV. But the personal statement is really your opportunity to kind of set the tone for why you are different from other applicants and why you are really interested in this specific project. What is a personal statement? It's really just kind of a brief essay where you're describing your background, your goals, and why you're a really good fit for this particular opportunity. And you're going to be writing personal statements for a lot of things in the future. It's not just about the SPUR project, right? Job applications, grad school applications, cover letters for different jobs. This is a good practice regardless of this particular opportunity. So I think this is just kind of useful information to take forward. The reason that you're writing a personal statement and not just using a CV, right? I think sometimes we get into this habit of like, well, why can't I just provide a CV and then they know everything? It feels like a personal statement is just restating what's in my CV. The idea is that you're making a specific case for why this opportunity is good for you and why you are good for this specific opportunity. That's where it differs from the CV. So it's really important to keep that in mind as you're starting to draft the personal statement. So to get started, really what you're going to start off with is reading that project description, and you're going to brainstorm some ideas of what you'd like to present about yourself in this personal statement. So look at your CV if you already have one. If you don't, then start drafting that with Jen's suggestions, and then really, really carefully read the SPUR project description. So for a faculty initiated project, often they'll have references that you might need to read, or maybe they'll have websites that are helpful information. So you want to really take your time to analyze that information. And then I would recommend just making a short list of what your strengths are, what you identify as kind of something that you could bring to this specific project. You're trying to, for lack of a better word, really sell yourself to the person that's reading your personal statement. So this is kind of your opportunity to really make yourself shine. And then honestly, I think a really great way, and often what stands out to me in personal statements, is when people will ask questions of the project, right? And have something to bring. So maybe there's something in that project description that you want to know more about. And if you can put that into the personal statement somehow, that's a great way to really stand out as well. So this is your kind of just overall workflow. You want to brainstorm, you want to look at the project description, think about your strengths, and then think about any questions that you might have about the specific project. What are you actually including finally, right? You are probably just going to have a short one-page summary. So you want to really prioritize the information that you're including. So who are you? Why are you interested in this specific SPUR project? I've seen in the past, sometimes I'll get a really generic personal statement. And so I think there was a question previously about, why maybe can you submit the same CV for different SPUR projects? Well, if you're submitting the same CV, the personal statement is where you can start to differ and diverge and have a little bit more personalized information. So sometimes I will get a SPUR project, a personal statement for a SPUR project that isn't even mine, right? So it's describing things that aren't even for the specific call, or it's really generic. It doesn't tell me that the person or the applicant has spent any time reading the project description. So specificity is really your friend here. And then you want to outline what are your skills and how your skills and maybe your interests align with the goals of the project. So maybe you're building new skills that you don't have previously, but you're really interested in a specific thing in this project. So you want to say what those are and highlight your previous experience as it relates to this specific project. And then, think about what you're going to be able to bring to this project, because they want to see what you're able to bring to the specific SPUR project, essentially. And then again, the way that this differs from the CV, you're not including all of your background information. You're including very relevant background information that applies to the project description. So pick a couple, maybe 2 or 3 experiences that really help to define why this is a good fit for you. Okay, so we're going to go over a couple of strategies to develop your personal statement. Start off with organizing, right? Look at the project website or the project description, gather information. If you look at Professor Echeverry's project description for her SPUR project, there's actually a list of references, for example. That's a really great way to start. Read those references, read a couple of those papers, because that may come up in the interview. They may want to know why you're interested in this project, and that's a great place to start. If there are links to social media pages, if there are links to websites, do your homework, go to those websites, look to see what they're saying, and then bring out some of that research that you've done in the personal statement. So don't wait for it to happen in the interview. Start to put in a little bit of the kind of hints that you've done this homework in your personal statement itself. So you're going to do your background research, and then after you're done organizing all this information, you start to generate your outline of what you want your personal statement to look like. So when you're drafting, right, you're going to use that rough outline, and the first time that you write a draft, it's totally fine for it to be, maybe it's a disjointed sentences, maybe you have words that don't make sense, maybe everything is not connected. That's fine. I would say your first draft is the draft that you're not going to present to the SPUR app, you're not going to upload to the SPUR portal, right? This is just your opportunity to word vomit everything that you've just researched and brainstormed. Once you're done drafting that first draft, you're going to have plenty of opportunity to rewrite it. And in this kind of like revising stage, this is where you're checking for little things like grammar and spelling. If there's a way to reduce your wordiness, how many words or phrases that you're using to describe something, this is where you would do that. And then one of the things that I found really helpful is asking other people to proofread your personal statement. Maybe it's your roommate, maybe it's a friend in a class. Just, having someone else put eyes on your personal statement is a really great way for you to kind of catch errors that you may not, or catch kind of things that you may not have thought of that come up for folks who are not as close to what you've been doing, right? If you spend hours just like pouring on this personal statement, it's easy to kind of get caught up in the weeds. And so I really, really encourage you to rely on your network, on your peer network for this kind of proofreading. Okay, So I wanted to spend a little bit of time focusing specifically on how you're going to talk about your previous experience or interests. And we'll use a fun little acronym here, the STAR acronym, where you're talking about your experience as a situation, the task that you accomplished, the action that you took, and the result that you achieved. So you're going to really describe what that ability, skill, or interest is. You're going to explain what your role was in that experience, what you did or what you learned, and what did you achieve. Okay, so just take this basic setup when you're trying to draft an explanation for why a previous experience is relevant to this current project. So I have an example sentence here that's based on a class. So sometimes your previous experiences or interests are based on something that you learned in a class previously, right? Especially with SPUR, maybe you don't have a lot of previous research experience, but what you're learning in class is absolutely relevant to why you might be interested in a project. So here, right, the situation is that during my entomology class, I really became fascinated by X topic, right? The evolution of so-and-so or sociality and ants. Then you describe the task. For this class, I conducted field observations of ant colonies, which deepened my understanding of their social behavior. And the action, so what did you do after that happened, right? This work inspired me to apply for this specific project. And this is going to help me build critical skills in insect research. Really, so you're weaving kind of this narrative of why that previous experience is helping you with this particular project. So if this is a great way to tie in your previous interest and experience with the current project. Okay, so a couple things to avoid. I would really recommend avoiding as best as you can flashy metaphors and flowery language. Sometimes, it's really great to be passionate. I'm not saying not to be passionate. And I think that's something that comes out in your interviews and in your personal statement. But using overly flowery language is not the way often to convey passion. So, a really kind of contrived example of this is this statement here, an example statement here. Driven by a deep, unquenchable fire within, I'm really eager to take the first step towards a path to becoming a scientist. There's a way to describe this in a way that doesn't use that like unquenchable fire kind of language, because sometimes that can be a turnoff for the people that are reviewing your personal statements. The passion is definitely it should be there, and it'll come out in the interview stage. But here you want to try and say try to be as passionate as possible without going for the flashy metaphors. Another thing to try to avoid is overstatement or exaggeration, right? So don't over exaggerate the skills that you have. This is something that will come across as disingenuous in your personal statement. Don't try and sell something that you don't have. An example here, I possess the unparalleled ability to solve any problem in any instant, effortlessly mastering any task that comes my way. Right? This is very generic, but just think about ways that you might filter these types of statements out of your personal statement. A really important thing that Jen already touched on in the CV, it's important to show rather than tell. So the way that this is set up suggests that you should be telling, not showing, but you want to avoid telling and you really want to emphasize showing. So an example of a telling statement, I have an impressive record of academic success at Berkeley. A showing statement is I have performed well in all my classes to date, and I have been an active member of so-and-so an organization. So you're showing exactly why you have an impressive record of academic success, right? So it's really important to do this in a lot of your statements so that you're showing and demonstrating rather than telling. And then the fourth thing to avoid, I have kind of already mentioned this before, it's really easy to see when a personal statement is generic and you're not addressing the project. So definitely avoid those kinds of sentences that are not specifically addressing the project description. And then at the end, you're putting it all together, right? You're doing your proofread. You want to go back and make sure that you're avoiding these 4 kind of basic pitfalls that I've been seeing a lot crop up in personal statements. And really do encourage you to share your personal statements with other people, because it really helps to have other people's eyes on something that you've spent a lot of time on. And then one final suggestion, I often will read the things that are written out loud, and I'll catch errors that I didn't catch when I'm just reading it on a computer screen or kind of printed out. So that's a really great way, kind of like right before you're ready to submit, read your personal statement out loud, and you might catch a couple of things that you didn't notice before. And I think that is on time, so I can stop here for questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Nita. That was so wonderful and thorough. One of the questions from our audience already is, are you able to share your personal statement slides with
Yes,
the
of course.
audience? Great, thank you. So just whenever you get a chance, if you can plop it in the chat and share it to everyone. I have another question from the audience. Should the personal statement be more narrative based with a story/experience, or more straightforward?
I think it's a great question. I think part of this tends to be personal style elements. I think that it's a space where you can have a narrative aspect. It doesn't hurt to have a little bit, but you don't want your entire personal statement to be a story. Maybe it's a sentence here or there that really kind of brings your kind of reviewer into your story. But I would say definitely kind of the bulk of it should primarily focus on why you're interested in the project, what your skills are. And then if you're able to weave in narrative elements, I think that helps. But really, I think that honestly, it's a stylistic thing. So I would recommend, try to be as straightforward as possible, especially because you only have about a page. Yeah.
Another question from the audience. If we've already been involved in a SPUR project that is similar to the one we are applying to, is it appropriate to write about that in the personal statement?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it really helps to show that previous experience. And I've received applications that really highlight, for example, what they learned in that previous experience and what they'd like to learn with this new one. So I think that's a great thing to include for sure.
Great, thank you, Nita. Another question from the audience was, are there examples of personal statements? I don't know if you have any, Nita. I can also link the cover letter samples from the Career Center website.
Yeah, I have some examples that I can share. So maybe what I'll do, Sarah, is I'll share these with you at the end, and you can share it with the rest of the group.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll also just plop the cover letters, which aren't the same as a personal statement, but very, very similar, into the chat as well. Okay. If a faculty member you are applying to has multiple projects available and you have an interest in both of them, but a lot more in one than the other, how should we write about that in the personal statement? This can also be relevant for URAP as well.
That's a great, tricky question. So I think, of course, you're going to have a different personal statement for each of those projects. And then I think, be honest. If I think it'll come through if there's one of those projects that you're more excited about. You can say, this project is very exciting to me. I'm also interested in this other project. But this is why I like the ideas, or I like the tasks that I will be doing in this project, or I like the project description, right? So I think it being straightforward and honest about that is a good way to go, because they're going to see your application. They're going to see why you've applied to these two projects. One way that you could navigate that as well is maybe to highlight the commonality that you see between those two projects, especially if it's the same lab or the same PI. There is likely a common thread between those two projects. So maybe you can highlight that and say, you see that there's a connection between these two different projects. But this is why project A is more appealing or more interesting to you based on your interests and experiences.
Thank you, Nita. This is a more general question about SPUR. Where can I find out more about the projects and the level of involvement that the research supervisor expects?
So I guess this is going to be on the SPUR project descriptions, or the For the faculty initiated projects, I think there's generally information included in the project description. There's also a section that describes the undergraduate's roles and your qualifications. And usually the faculty member, the staff member will include a description of their involvement. So often you'll have, for example, a faculty initiated project where a graduate student is the supervisor, and they will say that, or a staff member is a supervisor. So it's in that same project description section.
Great, thank you, Nita. I have a really great question from the audience. How do I write a strong personal statement if I feel unsure about my strengths or have a lack of confidence in myself?
That's an excellent question. So, I mean, I think part of this is identifying and talking to folks, like Jen, who are able to see that in your CV and identify that you actually have a lot of strengths. And these are the ones that would be great to highlight in the personal statement. So if that's something that you're struggling with, sometimes it's your friends, talk to your friends and say, hey, I really want to go for this position. What do you what do you think I should highlight about what you know me best. You're my best friend. What should I highlight in this? I think that's a great way to start because there's no barrier to that conversation. Go to advisors like Jen. Other folks in the advising office, I think in CNR, are wonderful and would be happy to do that for you. Maybe your own major advisor. I think, there's a lot of people who will be able to kind of bolster you and support you and help you see kind of those strengths and those abilities.
Thank you for that wonderful answer, Nita. I would also say you have transferable skills to apply to these projects. You got here to Berkeley, right? Like got accepted into this university, you applied, and people saw something in your admissions materials to get you here to Berkeley. So you are definitely like a qualified human who are bringing strengths and skill sets to these positions. And so, even if it's like you were a barista, you were a server at a restaurant, like there are transferable skills from those experiences. You were president of your sustainability club, in high school. Though there are so many transferable skills from your guys' experiences, you guys. Another question from the audience. For the compelling image or personal background part of the personal statement, can students write about an experience they mentioned in their resume, or is it better to share something new?
I think it doesn't hurt, especially if this is a really important aspect of your experience. You obviously want it in your resume, but if you didn't have, if one line wasn't enough to really describe what that was an important aspect of your experience or your background, absolutely. The personal statement is where you're allowed to kind of expand on that and to elaborate on it. If it's little things, then you can start to expand or introduce new ideas in the personal statement. But really, your personal statement, you want to think of it as kind of like expanding a little bullet point that's on your CV, essentially.
Great, thank you so much, Nita. For the parts about having experience with something, Excel or R, should students go in depth about potential projects or potential interests that they have in those areas and skill sets?
Yeah, if the project specifically asks for those, if it's highlighted in the qualification section that you need that experience, saying in your personal statement how you use, right? Showing rather than telling how you used R, how you used Excel in a previous job. That's the way to highlight that experience. Not just that you have skills in R and that you have skills in Excel. You want to demonstrate what was the specific thing that you did in R, if that makes sense.
How extensively should I talk about a prior career or experience, let's say in the arts, if it has little to do with the research project of interest, biology?
I personally, and I think it sounds like Jen recommended this as well, and Sarah, an experience is an experience. And I think there are transferable skills regardless of the discipline. So I would encourage you to include that information. And sometimes it's often seen as kind of a positive thing to have that breadth of knowledge and to have that background. So there's no harm in including that. And I think honestly, it's a good thing.
Do I have a good chance of getting a SPUR project if my GPA is not that high?
Absolutely. And I think this is, it will depend, I think, on who the reviewer is or the faculty advisor is, but this opportunity is for people to gain experience. And as a reviewer, I think the GPA is one of the last things that I look at personally. So that's just based on my experience, and then maybe the other folks can explain their personal take on this. But the GPA is not what I use to assess a person's kind of fit for a position.
Yeah, to also add on to that, Nita, that the GPA minimum to apply to faculty-initiated projects is a 2.0. So, as long as you are at the minimum, you will have an equal opportunity for your application to be reviewed. Okay, thank you so much, Nita, for that wonderful presentation and for your thoughtful answers to our questions. Finally, we have Professor Echeverry, who will be sharing how to prepare for and navigate the interview process. Take us away.
Yeah, so thank you both Jen and Nita for that useful information. And I wanted to share that unlike the resume and personal statement, that there's kind of like a template of what is a good one, interviews are very variable. In some cases, you might not even have to do an interview. In some cases, you might be interviewing with the professor directly. In some cases, you might be interviewing with a panel, like the professor and the grad students. So for this one, it's kind of more like case-to-case basis. But I want to say that one thing that I've learned as a person who has done a lot of interviews, both as an interviewer and as an interviewee, is that interviews, if you already got to the point of getting an interview, that means you're kind of pre-screened that you are a good fit by some metrics. Like we get tons of applicants, right? So we only interview those that we feel like are meeting already, so minimum criteria. So what's the purpose of an interview? It's to know not just your qualifications for the job, it's mostly to know about the fit, the enthusiasm, and the readiness to contribute to our labs. And so what do we look for as advisors in an interview? We look mostly for students that are curious, like this is a role, and especially a SPUR application, that if you have no experience, that's irrelevant to me. I want to give you that experience, but I need you to want to learn. I'm actually feel very discouraged with students that come pretending like, oh, I've already done this several times. I know what I'm doing. I'm actually more eager to find the person who is humble and say, I've never done this, but I'm here to learn. What can I do to support you and your lab and your students? So that's one thing about the interview. And the questions that we might ask are both a combination of getting to know you and your kind of hard skills. Like, do you actually know how to do these Python and R? And like, I might need help with statistical analysis, but also to know about your work ethic. Are you reliable? If I send you an email during work hour weeks, will you reply eventually to me? Are you eager to participate in a collaborative project? So what gives a good interview? The first thing is like preparation is key. Before you interview, read about that lab, think about the lab's research. Maybe they've been publishing papers on that topic. So do some kind of preparation yourself to know what that lab is doing. Be ready to answer, why this lab excites you, why this professor, why this project, why this group of people. Be prepared to discuss your experience. So sometimes, we already read your personal statements and your resumes, so we kind of know what you guys are doing, but some of it, like, take this space as like to explain the nuances. So you might say, I took biology courses on like whatever, plants and animals, but then we might be wanting to follow up. So be ready to discuss anything that you put in your statements. Like we might have follow-up questions about what you already wrote. So, read those again to remind yourself what you wrote. Also, treat this as a two-way conversation. We have questions, but almost every interview has a component that says, do you have questions for me or for us? And be ready to have questions. What are good questions to ask us? Like mentorship style, expectations, like, okay, so what do you expect what would success look like for this position? Like at the end of this SPUR project, do I need to write a report? Would I be a co-author on a publication? And be ready to ask us questions, because that to us means you need to think that this is like a two-way stream. We are giving you experience, but you need to get also something in return. It might be that your interests are going to grad school, so you might want any of us to write recommendation letters for you, or you would like to be involved in learning how a paper is written. So ask those questions when that part comes up. Okay, so another thing I wanted to talk about is how to make a strong impression during an interview. So be professional, but be natural. So of course, like show up on time, speak with confidence, but don't feel pressure to be overly formal. Actually, the more authentic and genuine you are, the better chances you'll get it. Because if there are things you don't know, just say, I don't know, but I would like to learn, or I can get back to you on that. That to me means you're being honest. If you answer everything the way I'm supposed to hear it, I'm gonna think like it's too rehearsed and you're like not being fully yourself. And remember, in interviews, a lot about personality and work ethic. So you don't have to get it perfect. There's like, unlike a resume or a statement where a typo, like poor spelling, gives ideas of like, okay, you're not giving detail oriented. An interview is okay to say, you know what, I don't know this. Could you repeat the question for me, or something like that? It's show reliability, so show that you can follow through. That if you've worked projects that you have, how have you managed your responsibilities? Like, have you ever turned the reports? Have you how do you best correspond over email? Do you know how to manage Slack? Things like that. And then rehearse and practice common questions with your friends, with your roommates. Take advantage of the internet has tons of interview questions that you can practice. Like, for example, almost all of us will ask you, why do you want to join this lab or this project? And in that case, be really specific about what interested you. Is the theme, the methods, that person you really want to, maybe you took a class with one of us and you're like, I really want to know more about how you work because I really enjoyed like taking your class. Almost all of us might ask you, like, what are your career goals? And if you said that you have experience with something, like, oh, I have experience doing molecular work, then we might ask, well, what do you mean by that? Or like, give us examples. So be very precise in your answers. Don't try to ramble too much. Say, oh, I experienced these things in a molecular lab. I know how to mix this, or I have certificates for safety, whatever you've done. And then lastly, after the interview is over, the follow-up and next steps are very important. So like maybe email a thank you email saying like, I express my appreciation for you considering me, reaffirm interest, but be patient. Like, we get tons of emails, but then so if we don't respond, like, be proactive, but don't nudge us like every single day, but be like, hey, I haven't heard back, what happened, or something like that. But importantly, I want to remind you that interview is a two-way conversation, and that is not just about us finding the right person for the project, but also you finding whether you think you'd be a good match to contribute to that lab. And And do not underestimate your soft skills. There was a lot of comments on that earlier in this panel, but for me, I'm growing my lab, so I need someone that outside this SPUR project might want to join like our lab dinners and like our events, and like that you would actually show up to be a community member. Not every lab will have the same lab culture, so definitely think about those soft skills and like what else beyond the just specific data analysis or data collection task you can contribute to the lab as a whole. And with that, I'll end and I'll take any questions that you might have.
Great, thank you so much. We have some questions from the audience. How many days should we wait to reach out to send a thank you email?
Maybe like 2 or 3 days after the interview happened. That is like common practice, and it's not required. It's just like a good way to like remind that person that you're on their radar and that they just interviewed you.
Great. Should we dress business casual for our interviews?
You don't have to, but if that makes you feel, more confident in yourself and giving the answers, you can do it. As I said, like be professional, but don't be overly formal. I mean, we know you're undergraduate students, so it's not like we're not like hiring you to work for like a bank or something. So it's like just be yourselves. But if dressing more formally gives you confidence in yourself, like go for it.
What are some examples of good questions to ask at the end of an interview?
For example, how do you describe the mentorship style of your lab? Ask about the lab culture. So for example, like, so how does your lab or this group interact with beyond the like actual tasks of work? Or ask things about the communication style. For example, like I prefer to manage all my communications on Slack. And so you might ask things like, how do you normally communicate with the people you're supervising? Is it by phone, Zoom, in person? How frequently do you want to meet with me? Things like that.
Thank you. I have a more general question for SPUR. Would you recommend applying to multiple projects? As the SPUR coordinator, I would say yes, you're allowed to apply for a maximum of 3 SPUR projects. Applying for more than 3 SPUR projects is a violation of SPUR policy, and you'll receive a scary email from me asking which ones you want to delete. So please only apply to up to 3 projects, but applying to 3 projects does increase your chances of getting a research position. You can also apply for up to 3 URAP projects. So I highly recommend applying for 3 SPUR and applying for 3 URAP. It's like the more you put yourself out there, the greater chance you have of securing a research position. Another question from the audience. What are some of the biggest mistakes to avoid during an interview? And what are things that make you think an interview didn't go well?
Yeah, that's a good question. So biggest mistakes, when people do not come prepared. So for example, I've had people that like I asked like, so why are you interested? And they clearly didn't even read what my lab does or who I am or my paper. So that really is very easy to detect as an interviewer. Another thing that's easy to detect is when you or like the interviewee is overselling or exaggerating the experience. So for the most part, you're going to be interviewed by professors, PhD students, or postdocs. They're very smart people. So we know that at your career stage, it's impossible to have the experience that we have. And so when students like undergrads are like, oh, I've published 3 papers and did all the graphs for that paper, like I'm like suspicious, like, did you or was the grad student in the lab? Like you might have and you might have, but just don't oversell it because we know that at the career stage you're at. And like the most important thing is like, be honest. Like, yeah, I've done this, or I participated in groups that did this, but I would like to learn how to do it myself. And that's the kind of profile that we are looking for. I will say another common mistake is that people focus only on what they'll gain. So they're like, I'm gonna do this, I need your letter. But again, this is like a collaboration. Like, we want to give you mentorship and training opportunities and teach you how to do, science and participate in these group projects. And you'll get a lot of that, but then we'll also get a lot of this kind of, a new person in the lab is great. Like, be part of the community, and the ways you contribute are not just the technical, that's why like the GPA question also, it's interesting because it's not like we're not just looking for the person with the best GPA. They most likely, well, first of all, there's only one, and we're hiring lots, but we're looking for someone that's gonna come and work with us and be a team player. And that's very important. And then the last common mistake that people do is that, like, ghosting, showing up late, don't replying to emails, like, just it indicates that you're not that interested.
Great, thank you so much for answering that. We have another question from the audience. After we ask our questions at the end of the interview, and then they respond to those questions, should we connect it back to ourselves or just acknowledge the information?
This is, I don't know, it would depend on case by case. Like, if it was a follow-up question about yourself and you need to like talk about it more, feel free to say that. But usually it's kind of like they will say, was that clear? Or do you have any more questions? And so if the answer is no, just end it there. Like, it's okay to show you are prepared, but also just know that, it's a conversation. It's not that formal.
What are some tips for preparing well in interviews for those who tend to feel nervous or anxious?
Oh, this is a good question. Well, so remember that being anxious is just an experience of being human in this world. And the fact that you are nervous and anxious shows us that you actually care, right? Like, I am actually a little worried when someone just presents like completely like, I know what I'm doing, because that's like overselling, right? So it's okay to be nervous. We all get nervous with these things. Things that might help, just like breathe in if you need a minute to say like, I can you repeat that question? Like, it's okay to say that and just be yourself. And also, if it helps, just know that like the more interviews you do, the more you learn how to get good at it. So try to practice with your roommates, try to practice with your friends, and just try to enjoy it. And sometimes it's okay if like you might feel the interview after you did it like, I didn't do a good job, and that's okay. You'll do better the next time. Or you might think, oh, I did great, and then you don't get the job, and that's fine too. Like, it's just like learn how to receive feedback from friends and just practice, practice, practice.
Great, thank you so much. Here's another question from the audience. Let's say I was reading through professors' published papers, but it's hard to understand. Is it all right if we ask them about it in our questions portion of the interview? I'm not always sure I 100% understand some of the very complicated work that they do.
Yeah, it's totally okay if it's relevant. Of course, like big labs, like they publish on like totally different things. So like the project that you might be interviewing for might not be like directly relevant to other papers in that lab. So, you don't have to show that like you read every single one. But it does show to me that being curious, and just like you would do in a class, I'm like, hey, I was reading about this, but I didn't understand this part. Could you explain that to me? And that's actually very good because like for the most part, anybody doing this profession as professors, PhD students, we are educators above anything. So we actually enjoy, explaining and teaching. And the fact that you don't understand it reflects more poorly on us, on how we wrote it. Like everyone should be understanding what our work is about. So feel free to ask follow-up questions.
I have a more general SPUR question that I'll go ahead and ask and then answer. Can I apply to SPUR projects if I'm already enrolled in 19 units? So the answer is yes, you can apply to SPUR projects. And again, please apply to up to 3 projects because just applying doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to secure a research position. You are allowed to be enrolled in up to 20.5 units during the adjustment period. But I also kind of want to talk more broadly about like workload, life balance. The projects will say how many hours they're looking for. So 1 unit equals 3 hours of work a week. 2 units is 6 hours, and so forth and so on. If you're already enrolled in 19 units and the project is wanting 9 to 12 hours of work a week, is that something you can feasibly do with your current workload? And are you going to be able to give this project as well as your schoolwork all that you can and all that, your best quality? So I really encourage you guys to think about like how many hours are there in a day? And is this a feasible project for me to take on given the maybe high amount of coursework I have on my plate? Professor Echeverry, I have a question from the audience. What are some outcomes from people who have worked in your lab? What have they gone on to do?
Oh, so my lab is new. I don't have any alumni yet.
Great. Well, we're excited to see what they do end up doing.
Yeah.
Great. Well, are there any other questions from the audience? We have a couple more minutes. Feel free to go ahead and submit them. For seniors graduating this semester, does it affect SPUR selection? I mean, I can speak from a general no. If you're a student this semester, you can be enrolled in research units and then therefore qualify for SPUR projects. Professor Echeverry, I don't know if you have any thoughts on graduating seniors applying to positions.
No, I would say, I mean, similar to the answer about the work-life balance, like it's kind of hard for us to think about how much you have on your plate and whether you'd be able to juggle, this plus graduation plus like everything you're planning to do next year. Like if you're planning to go do something abroad, to apply for masters, so it's more like be your own judge of time management because we wouldn't know, how efficient you are at managing and juggling all these things in life.
Great, thank you. We have a couple of similar questions. Does SPUR ever extend to the summer? And after getting into a SPUR project, can you work with the professors/lab group beyond the semester? I can kind of speak on like the SPUR technical side. So students can work on a SPUR project that is eligible for funding with the professor for 2 semesters, and summers would be one of those semesters. It's up to the faculty to apply again for summer or fall SPUR, and then they need to let us know that they will be continuing working with the students. And then I would also go on to say that it is normal for SPUR students to continue on in the labs. And again, that's up to the professor, and they can be enrolled in research units in the future. I don't know if you have anything to add to that. Nita, do you have any experience with this?
Yeah, I mean, I think so the question about the summer, there's separate projects, and I would encourage you to kind of, maybe if you've already applied and you've been accepted into a SPUR project and are interested in continuing, ask that PI, are you going to be offering it again? And that's one option. And then if the answer is no, you could always ask, I really like this work. How do I keep doing this with you? Is there a way for me to continue doing this research outside of the SPUR program? So that's kind of my main recommendation. And I think because the SPUR project is designed to provide people with experience who don't already have this research experience, it is good to kind of look into maybe broadening your skill breadth, the breadth of your skills, and look into other projects. But always ask the person that you're working with first, because they may have some ideas about ways for you to continue with them.
I have a question that I'll open up to all of our panelists. How do research supervisors or professors generally feel about cold emailing, especially when it feels maybe less daunting than applying to a SPUR project?
Like cold emailing being just sending like an email like, hey, I'm interested in your lab, or
Yeah, I think that's what they're referring to, yeah.
okay, so I will say that I get about 80 emails like these per day. So we don't reply, or at least I don't. I can't keep track of, because I get from the whole world, right? I am more likely to reply if you took a class with me, if you come to my office. Like, honestly, we go to campus and so many students just knock on my door, then I meet you, then it's easier to get on my calendar. But just cold emailing, unless you're maybe try emailing the grad students in that lab or the postdocs, but the profs, I can guarantee that all our emails look like something you don't want to see.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, I think emails are kind of like, it's not really a personal statement, but specificity is helpful, right? Like why are you emailing me out of the 80 other people that I've that have emailed me today or in this past week? And I definitely recommend that you take advantage of kind of being on campus and going to those folks kind of offices or checking in with them. I personally, if I'm advertising this for a project, I think it's totally fine for you to reach out and ask about the project before you apply. I have no issues with that. So, and I think that'll be kind of a case by case basis, but I think that's definitely an option.
Great.
The Office of Undergraduate Research, I'll put the link in the chat, Temple, maybe you can share it. They actually, I often refer students to this. Under their resources tab, they have a little workshop on how to email a professor and get a positive response. So I throw that out there. Maybe that's something that's helpful.
Great, thank you so much, Jen. And our final question is, do SPUR projects ever not get filled? Yes, maybe I have one out of all of the SPUR projects that don't get filled, but in general, professors who post their SPUR projects want undergraduate students, and they work really hard to review all the applications and select their students. I also will be sending out an email with SPUR projects with maybe lower application counts. So make sure to look out for an email from me with those and apply to them if they interest you. That is all the time we have for questions. I want to thank everybody. Big thank you to our presenters for sharing all of their knowledge with us. I hope you all had a chance to ask questions and learn about each piece of the SPUR application process. Once again, students can submit their applications for up to 3 faculty-initiated projects between now and January 28th at 5 p.m. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me at spur@berkeley.edu. Thank you all for joining us.